Hi, I'm Leenie Ann. Welcome to this author reading of Dispelling the Fog, a sweet Regency romance novelette. Before I begin reading the first of the 3 chapters that comprise this story, I must warn you that I am not a professional narrator. I'm just an author, sitting in her room with her laptop, a book, and no fancy equipment, reading her story to you. Allow me to apologize in advance for any stumbles that may happen. I hope you will still enjoy the story. Each video will be 1 chapter long. To help you know what to expect in this story, I will begin by reading a short description before launching into chapter 1. Ready? Let's begin. Dispelling the Fog. Ever since a scoundrel broke her heart 3 years ago, Madeline Adcock has been searching in vain for a gentleman to both love and trust. In fact, she has nearly given up hope of ever breaking free of the fog of uncertainty which engulfs her. However, with the help of her brother and his best friend, love might just chase that fog away forever. Chapter 1. The horizon crept closer while the sun sank in the sky and the shadows of twilight welcomed its misty friend. Together they would obscure much: houses, roads, stars, and even some of the light of the moon. The light from the lantern hanging in the garden would be scattered and hazy rather than crisp and far-reaching. Fog brought things close. It shrouded everything with its blanket, leaving nothing unchanged by its presence. It was not unlike how sorrow could envelop those it touched. Madeline Adcock blew out a breath and watched it join the mist that hung low in the air. The evening was cool, damp, and rather dreary. Such an atmosphere suited her just fine. She did not feel like being anything more than melancholy. She was done. She could not hold on to a foolish dream any longer. I have decided. Her heart raced at her own declaration, while her mind had reconciled itself to a future for which she had not long. Her heart was not so easily convinced of the correctness of her choice. You have? Her brother's arm tensed under her fingers. You may choose. Are you certain? Fletcher's somber tone held a touch of disappointment. I have had 3 seasons to attempt to make my choice, and still I cannot see anyone without thinking about him. Neither she nor her brother would mention the name of the charming cad who, during her first season, had led her to believe that he was more than he was. She knew she should be grateful that she had not had quite enough money to tempt the fellow to actually marry her, and in a way she was. Life with such a dissembler would not have been a happy one. Yet part of her longed for the picture he had painted of a home filled with frivolity and good fortune. For 3 seasons now she had attempted to prove to herself that such a portrait was not a fantasy. However, risking her heart to discover if it were attainable was far more difficult than she had ever thought it could be. Her ability to trust had been shattered in the game that scoundrel had played. He is but one of a sea of thousands. Not every fellow is going to pretend to be what he is not. Her brother stopped walking down the garden path and turned toward her. I want you to find someone who loves you as I do. Well, a bit more, I suppose, he added with a teasing smile. And I want you to be equally as smitten with him. That is precisely why I have chosen to allow you to pick a husband for me. I trust you. And very few others. You forget that I was taken in by him just as much as you were. I did not see him as duplicitous until that announcement appeared in the paper. Oh, what a wretched day that had been. Madeline had not seen him for 2 weeks. He had not been at any of the soirees she had attended, nor had he sent her a note to say he was going to be gone. Then, on that fateful morning, there was his name in the paper, printed in black letters for all to see, and linked with that of another lady. He was married. According to the article in the gossip sheets, his wife was a distant cousin, and the heiress to a fortune, which, Madeline discovered later, included an extensive estate. Her 10,000 had paled in comparison to such a situation. She had seen him once after that, in the park, happily ensconced in a fine carriage. He had nodded his head in her direction, and then kissed the fingers of his wife. She had nearly fainted dead away, but her brother had been there, and had kept her from succumbing to the flurry of emotions that overcame her at the scene. That was how Fletcher was. He was steady and strong. She wrapped her arms around his and rested her head against his shoulder. He would make certain she was safe. He always had. "I trust you," she said once again. "Very well. I shall give it consideration, and see who I might know and could recommend. And then, once you are married, you can return the favor and help me select a bride." "I thought you were decided. Miss Huntley is so sweet, and you seem fond of her. I even heard you speaking about her to Mr. Portman." Noah Portman and her brother had been friends for as long as Madeline could remember, and the fact that her brother had spoken of one lady so frequently as he had Miss Huntley, both to her and to his dearest friend, had marked the young lady as a potential sister in Madeline's mind. "I'm nearly decided, but one never knows what might have happened over summer. If I had met her at the beginning of the season instead of at the end—" Madeline felt the shoulder against which she leaned lift and lower. "One should not make hasty decisions," he added. She would not disagree with him on that. She had allowed her heart to be given too easily her first season, and look where that had gotten her. Nowhere worth being, that was for certain. "What decisions are you making in haste?" a voice asked from the misty shadows near the low hedge which bordered the garden near the drive. "Eavesdropping is not polite, Mr. Portman," Madeline replied. Noah chuckled. "I was not listening on purpose. I just happened to hear. That's not the same as eavesdropping, I will have you know." He pushed his way through a small gap in the hedge. "We have a gate," Fletcher said. "Not where I needed it." Noah clapped his hands and then rubbed them together. "Now, with what decisions can I help you?" Madeline shook her head. "None. I have made my decision." "Then, Fletcher, explain the situation to me, and I shall give you my best words of wisdom." Fletcher laughed. "Words of wisdom? Did you get some when you were in town?" "You wound me," Noah cried in mock indignation. "Was your journey good?" Madeline asked, bringing a more serious tone back to the conversation. "Yes, it was exceptional. My new curricle will be ready in a month's time." He pulled a watch from his pocket. "And tell me, Miss Adcock, what do you think of this chain?" He dangled it in front of her. Madeline caught the twirling timepiece, which she knew was one of his prized possessions, and looked closely at the links of gold attached to it. "I think it suits quite well. It's as if they were always meant to be together." He lifted the watch from her hand and ran a finger over the cover before tucking it back in his pocket. "I thought the same thing. I think grandfather would have chosen this particular chain. That is why I picked it. He would be pleased to see you caring for it so well." "I thank you." His eyes lingered for a moment on hers before he turned back to her brother. "About the decisions you need to make. Do you think we might be able to discuss the particulars inside with a cup of tea or mug of ale?" "I do not see a need to discuss them at all, but I will not refuse your company," Fletcher answered. Madeline dropped her brother's arm. "I shall go in ahead of you and see that some ale?" She waited for a nod from her brother before continuing. "Is brought to the small drawing-room, along with some cheese and rolls, or perhaps a pasty." "Are there any biscuits or cakes?" Noah asked. "I will see what can be acquired," she assured him. "You are a blessed angel," he called after her. Noah had a monstrous sweet tooth. He had often been scolded for eating too many sweets when he was a boy. Not that anyone could stay put out with him for very long. He just had a way about him that made one accept him, faults and all. Her brother was fortunate to have such a friend as Noah Portman. "Briggs, we would like to have some food brought to the small drawing-room." Madeline took off her wrap and folded it over her arm. Ale for Mr. Portman and Fletcher, a hot toddy for me if there are some lemons still about, and some sort of cheese or meat and bread, as well as a few sweets for Mr. Portman. She smiled. And me, she added in a whisper. Right away, miss. May I take your wrap? Thank you, Briggs. But I can see it to my room. If you could have someone make sure the fire has been stirred in the drawing room. The air tonight is damp and chilling. Of course, miss. By the time Madeline had put her wrap in her room, made certain that the moisture in the night air had not done too much damage to her hair, and made her way to the drawing room, Noah and her brother were already settled into chairs next to the fire, which crackled its welcome to her. You can feel the seasons changing, Noah commented. The earth seems to be giving up her warmth much more quickly these days. And it is getting darker much sooner, Fletcher agreed. I like it. Madeline poked her feet out toward the fire. She loved curling up near the hearth with a blanket and a book in late autumn. She could do without the ice and snow of winter, but she did not mind the need for warmer layers and a fire. For now, Fletcher muttered, you'll have had enough of it before the cold has decided to take its leave of you. That was true. By Twelfth Night, she would be growing tired of the lack of sunshine. But then there would be the festivities of the season to keep her entertained. One could not miss the sunshine too much when standing in a ballroom lit by a host of candles, or when watching a story acted out on a stage. There were definitely parts of the season which called to Madeline. But then there was the purpose of the season for single young ladies and gentlemen, which caused the candles of that ballroom to glisten far less in Madeline's mind. What news is there from town? Fletcher asked. Noah shook his head. Nothing of significance. Your townhouse will be ready for your arrival after Twelfth Night. The paper in the sitting room on the second floor, that one next to Madeline's room, which goes with the blue bedroom, had just been finished when I arrived to have a look. I think that there is only the paint in the music room left as far as refreshing the decor is concerned. And your apartment? Fletcher asked. It is, as it always is. However, I might be giving it up, as a townhouse will be more practical once I marry, which I do intend to do at some point. I was told that the lease on the house 2 doors down from yours may become available, and I should very much like to be your neighbor both there and here. That would be lovely. Madeline enjoyed having Noah visit, and when in town he seemed to be at their townhouse nearly as often as they were, much like he was almost a daily visitor here when they were all in the country. A day without seeing Noah was a day that lacked a certain brightness. Do you plan to marry soon? Fletcher asked. Do you? Noah replied. I have seen nothing in the paper indicating that Miss Huntley has found a husband. His eyebrows waggled over twinkling eyes. That does not mean she has not found a future husband. As well as being steady and strong, Fletcher was cautious. It had taken him some time to accept the scoundrel who had broken Madeline's heart. There was something that had caused him to pause and only reluctantly give his approval. That was another reason why Madeline trusted him. If she had listened to his misgivings, she never would have found herself as she did now. It does offer some hope, Noah countered. And what about you, Maddie? Are you going to leave us forlorn before the end of this season by finally accepting one of your many suitors? Madeline accepted the cup of warm, spiced lemon and whiskey that Noah had retrieved for her from the tray which had been brought in. That is entirely up to my brother. Noah, who had turned from her to return to the tray on the table to the left of where they sat, stopped and turned back. What do you mean? I have decided that Fletcher can choose who I am to marry. Fletcher. Madeline nodded and sipped her drink. The fellow who cannot decide if he does or does not wish to marry the lovely Miss Huntley, who, by the by, he cannot stop speaking about and in whose presence he becomes oblivious to all else? Again, Madeline nodded and took a sip from her cup. Do you think that is wise? He cannot do any worse than I have done. Noah dropped into his chair without a mug of ale or a morsel of something sweet. You should have allowed me to shoot that blackguard. Fletcher had been angry about what had happened to Madeline, but his anger had been far better contained than Noah's had been when he heard of the ordeal. It was only her begging him not to be foolish which had kept Noah from calling the ne'er-do-well out. "And see you in chains?" She held his gaze. "I could not abide that, not even if the man deserved a hole in his shoulder." Noah smiled. "As long as you know he deserved it and think that I would have been successful, I shall make an effort to be content." "Thank you." Over the rim of her cup, Madeline returned his smile. If she could find a gentleman like Noah, she would be assured of a happy future. Whoever ended up being his wife would be a fortunate lady. It was too bad he had never paid her any more attention than one does the little sister of a friend. She could have easily been persuaded to love him. She liked him well enough. Or, she thought while sighing silently, perhaps even a bit more than well enough.